They say emotion makes us human. Machiavelli would have laughed at that. To him, emotion wasn't humanity, it was weakness wrapped in poetry. Love, guilt, pity, these were tools, not truths. He understood what most people never do, that the world doesn't reward sincerity, it rewards control. Picture him, Niccolo Machiavelli, exiled from Florence, stripped of power, his hands once on the pulse of politics, now digging in the dirt of his small farm. His enemies had humiliated him. His reputation was gone. And yet, it was here in defeat that he learned the most dangerous lesson of his life, how to detach from everything, to feel nothing, and to win anyway. Because real strength isn't found in feeling deeply, it's in feeling selectively. Machiavelli learned that to rule the world, or even survive it, you must first rule yourself. And that means learning to observe emotion without drowning in it, to weaponize calm while others are consumed by chaos. Here's the thing, when he wrote The Prince, it wasn't a manual for cruelty. It was a mirror held up to the world as it truly is, not as people pretend it to be. He saw the truth most of us hide from, that morality bends under pressure, loyalty is temporary, and love disappears the moment power shifts. He saw through the illusions because he had been crushed by them. Think about that. You don't learn detachment in comfort. You learn it when everything you cared about betrays you. When your country abandons you, when your name becomes a curse. That's when you realize feelings won't save you, strategy will. So Machiavelli began his transformation, not by killing his emotions, but by mastering their timing. He didn't suppress fear, he studied it. He didn't ignore desire, he harnessed it. Every passion became a blade he learned to handle without cutting himself. He understood something most good men never will. The person who controls their emotions controls the people who can't. And that's the foundation of power. In politics, in business, in relationships, emotion is the lever through which power moves. Those who act based on anger, guilt, or attachment are predictable. Those who can stay calm while others lose control can steer entire nations. Machiavelli's Florence was a pit of vipers, alliances built on convenience, loyalty traded for survival. He watched men die not because they were wrong, but because they were too human. Too attached to ideals, too desperate to be liked, too unwilling to play the darker game. He realized, if you wish to survive among wolves, you can't behave like a sheep. Let's break it down not in theory, but in what he actually did. When Machiavelli was tortured, literally hung by his wrists in a Florentine prison, he learned a truth that no philosophy book teaches. Pain is temporary, but composure is eternal. They wanted him to confess to conspiracy. He didn't. He stayed silent. He didn't beg, didn't break, and that silence became his power. It's easy to talk about resilience. It's different when resilience means not screaming while your body burns. That's the level of control he built, because he saw the world for what it was, not a battlefield of good and evil, but a chessboard of forces. Emotions were the pieces: anger, greed, fear, love, and the person who could move them without being moved by them was king. Centuries later, the same principle governs everything from boardrooms to governments. Look at how modern leaders operate. The successful ones don't act on impulse. They create impulse in others. They don't react emotionally. They trigger emotion strategically. That's Machiavellian psychology, not cruelty for cruelty's sake, but detachment for dominance. Now, let's go deeper. Why feeling nothing is not the absence of emotion. It's emotional discipline in its highest form. You see, emotions evolve to keep us alive, fear to protect, love to bond, anger to defend. But in the modern world, those same emotions can destroy us. The predator is no longer a tiger in the forest. It's the deal that manipulates you, the person who flatters you, the narrative that pulls you. The modern predator doesn't attack your body, it attacks your judgment. And when that happens, Machiavellian calm becomes your shield. Machiavelli believed that every human emotion has a predictable pattern, and if you can see that pattern, you can predict behavior. That's how he maneuvered through political storms that destroyed everyone else. His trick was simple but ruthless: never respond to emotion with emotion. When others raged, he watched. When others begged, he negotiated. When others celebrated, he planned. He treated emotion as weather, something to observe, not something to live inside. That's why he advised princes to appear merciful, faithful, humane, but only appear so, because the appearance of virtue is far more powerful than virtue itself. People judge what they see, not what you are. The world rewards image, and he learned to wear it like armor. But beneath that calm exterior, his mind was a weapon sharpened by observation. He dissected the psychology of kings, generals, and merchants like a surgeon studying a corpse. He saw how guilt controlled men more than fear, how flattery enslaved the proud, and how kindness was often a trap disguised as morality. He didn't hate humanity, he just understood it too well. And understanding people without being seduced by them is the real art of feeling nothing. Take Cesare Borgia, one of Machiavelli's greatest fascinations, a man both brutal and brilliant, feared and admired. Borgia ruled with precision. He used cruelty like a scalpel, not a hammer. When he needed to unite a chaotic region, he unleashed terror once, publicly, decisively. Then, when fear had done its work, he executed the very man who carried out the cruelty, gaining both control and praise. Machiavelli watched and understood. It wasn't the act that mattered. It was the timing of emotion, the orchestration of perception. Cruelty used strategically becomes mercy in disguise. That's not evil. That's psychological realism. Because power isn't about being good or bad, it's about effective calibration. You apply fear when it protects you, kindness when it serves you, indifference when it shields you. You adapt faster than others can label you. That's how Machiavelli trained himself to feel nothing, not through suppression, but through strategy. And if you want to master this same art today, you must first kill your need for validation. Every manipulation you've ever fallen for, every lie, every betrayal began with that need. The need to be seen, understood, loved, respected. Machiavelli learned to burn that out of himself. He didn't need to be liked, only understood by himself. Because the one who needs nothing from others cannot be controlled. Think about your life right now. How much of what you do is shaped by invisible emotional debts. You hold back words because you don't want to seem harsh. You overextend because you don't want to disappoint. You forgive too easily because you want peace. That's how power leaks out of you, drip by drip. Machiavelli would tell you, stop seeking fairness in a world that worships advantage. When he wrote that it is better to be feared than loved, he didn't mean cruelty is preferable to compassion. He meant that dependence on love makes you vulnerable, while fear or respect gives you control. People love you for what you give. They respect you for what you withhold. That's why restraint, emotional restraint, is one of the purest forms of dominance. Let's be honest, most people today are addicted to expression. They mistake emotional honesty for emotional power. But spilling everything you feel doesn't make you free. It makes you predictable. The modern world tells you to speak your truth. Machiavelli would smirk. He'd say, no, guard your truth. Let others reveal theirs first. That's psychological warfare, the kind that doesn't need violence. Every silence, every pause, every unreadable glance can be more commanding than an army of words. Because when people can't read you, they project their own fears and desires onto you. And that confusion, that uncertainty, becomes your leverage. Machiavelli's greatest strength wasn't manipulation, it was self-containment. He didn't react, he provoked reaction. He didn't chase, he positioned himself to be sought after. He didn't try to win arguments, he framed them so others couldn't escape. That's not coldness, that's precision. You can't play the game of power by emotion. You must play it by outcome. And outcomes favor those who can see emotion as data, not as destiny. That's how Machiavelli rebuilt his life from exile, not through pity, but through patience. While others wept for what they lost, he wrote the blueprint that would outlive kingdom. The prince wasn't his revenge, it was his resurrection. Because he'd mastered the most dangerous transformation of all, turning pain into perception. He no longer felt betrayal, he studied it. He no longer sought trust, he tested it. He no longer feared power, he understood it. That's how a man who lost everything became immortal, not through emotion, through mastery, but mastery comes at a price. When you learn to feel nothing, you begin to see everything, and that kind of clarity can be both power and curse. Because once you see the machinery behind people's actions, their vanity, fear, hunger, you can never unsee it. Machiavelli understood this too well. The moment he detached from emotion, the illusion of morality dissolved before him. He realized that behind every act of virtue lay self-interest. Behind every alliance, a calculation. Behind every smile, a mask. And so he built his life not on trust, but on observation. He'd walk through Florence, a city drenched in beauty but rotting with ambition, and watch men barter their integrity for approval. Merchants who prayed in church only to cheat by noon. Priests who preached humility but lusted for influence. Nobles who swore loyalty while sharpening daggers in secret. He didn't despise them. He simply saw them for what they were, predictable creatures of appetite. And from that realization came his greatest power. He never expected purity, only motive. Expectation is the root of emotional weakness. You expect fairness, you suffer injustice. You expect loyalty, you invite betrayal. You expect gratitude, you prepare your own disappointment. But when you expect nothing, no one can manipulate you. That's the paradox of detachment. When you no longer crave control, you gain it. Machiavelli lived that paradox every day. In exile, he corresponded with powerful men as though he still belonged among them. He wrote to princes, diplomats, and generals with the tone of an equal, never a beggar, because he knew the moment you beg, you confirm inferiority. He learned to move without visible need, and that made him magnetic. People sensed his depth, his dangerous understanding of human nature. They couldn't define it, but they felt it. That quiet intensity that belongs only to those who can't be easily read. And here's what most never grasp: emotional detachment doesn't make you robotic. It makes you deliberate. It gives you the space between impulse and action, the gap where strategy is born. The man who acts from anger might strike hard, but the man who waits, who observes, strikes once and ends the game. Machiavelli's writings were filled with this idea. That patience is not passivity. It's predation in disguise. He watched as impatient men ruined themselves, kings who lashed out too soon, generals who chased victory too eagerly, lovers who confessed too quickly, all victims of their own immediacy. But he waited. He knew that power rewards endurance, not enthusiasm. The modern world hates that truth. We worship speed, fast decisions, fast emotions, fast rewards, but that speed blinds us. It keeps us reactive instead of strategic. Machiavelli would say, the world belongs not to the fast, but to the unmoved, to the one who can pause while everyone else panics. You see this in every great manipulator of history. The calm ones, the silent ones, the ones who never reveal their full hand. Look at Napoleon, cold, calculating, unnervingly composed. He read Machiavelli. He lived Machiavelli. When others acted out of pride, he acted out of position. He turned the emotions of nations into weapons, made people want to obey him. Or think of modern politics, where emotional chaos wins elections, but emotional restraint rules them. The candidate who provokes outrage becomes the one who commands attention. The leader who stays calm during scandal becomes the one people trust to survive disaster. That's the game Machiavelli wrote about, not medieval politics, but the eternal anatomy of influence. And here's the dark part. To truly win that game, you must be willing to detach not only from others, but from parts of yourself. Machiavelli trained himself to see his own emotions like soldiers, useful but expendable. He could summon charm when it benefited him, withdraw warmth when it didn't, smile at an enemy if it bought him time. He wasn't emotionless. He was emotionally sovereign. Imagine having that level of internal command, where no insult can provoke you, no praise can seduce you, no rejection can define you, where you can look at both flattery and hatred with the same calm indifference. That's the apex of self-mastery. But to reach it, you must confront the enemy within your ego. The ego is the last emotional chain that binds even the strongest minds. It wants to be right. It wants to be admired. It wants to win arguments more than wars. Machiavelli dismantled his ego piece by piece. Every humiliation became an experiment. Every loss became data. Every failure, a map of human nature more accurate than any theory. He stopped asking, "Why me?" and started asking, "What does this reveal about power?" That shift from emotion to analysis is how he transcended the pain that destroyed others. And here's the truth most people never face: detachment is not a gift. It's built through suffering that doesn't break you, only refines you. Every betrayal, every rejection, every moment of public shame, these are your teachers. Each one cuts away the illusions that make you weak. That's how you train yourself to feel nothing, not through denial, but through endurance. You face the fire so many times that you stop fearing the burn. And when you stop fearing the burn, no one can hold fire over you again. That's what Machiavelli discovered. When pain no longer dictates your behavior, you become unpredictable. And unpredictability is the essence of power. Predictable people can be controlled. Unpredictable ones rewrite the rules, so he rewrote them. He wrote that it's not immoral to deceive when the world is built on deception. It's not cruel to strike first when mercy invites destruction. It's not hypocrisy to wear masks when everyone else is wearing theirs. This wasn't cynicism, it was clarity. He saw morality as a tool of power, not a prison of conscience. Because think about it, who decides what's moral? Usually the victors, the powerful, the ones who already control the narrative. So Machiavelli decided to control his own. He turned ethics into a weapon. He redefined virtue not as kindness but as effectiveness, not as honesty but as influence, not as innocence but as control. And that's where his genius reached its darkest brilliance. He realized that power does corrupt, it reveals. It strips away the performance of goodness and shows what a person truly values. For some, it reveals greed. For others, cowardice. But for the rare few, it reveals discipline. Discipline not to gloat, not to crumble, not to react. Machiavelli called this virtue not virtue in the moral sense, but the force of character that bends fortune to your will. Fortune, to him, was a wild river, uncontrollable, unpredictable. Most people pray it spares them. He studied its currents, mapped its bends, and built his foundation on higher ground. He wrote, "Fortune is a woman, and to be mastered she must be beaten and roughly handled." Harsh words, yes, but metaphorically he meant this. Fate yields to those who dare to confront it, not those who wait politely for its mercy. To live Machiavellian is to stop hoping for fairness and start demanding control. That's why his philosophy still terrifies people today, because it dismantles our favorite illusion, that being good guarantees good outcomes. It doesn't. The world isn't a moral equation. It's a negotiation of wills, and the one who feels least, who keeps their emotions caged until they serve a purpose, wins. You can see this pattern everywhere. In history, in business, in love. The conqueror who refuses to be provoked into reckless war. The executive who hides irritation behind a calm smile until the contract is signed. The person who stays silent during conflict, watching others reveal their weaknesses. These are the heirs of Machiavelli. The ones who understand that power flows to the emotionally disciplined like water to gravity. But there's one final layer, the one Machiavelli rarely spoke of directly, but lived every day, the loneliness of mastery. When you train yourself to feel nothing, you also train yourself to belong nowhere. People who can't manipulate you will fear you. People who can't read you will mistrust you. You'll live in a world of mirrors, reflections, and distance. But in that solitude lies an incredible freedom. The freedom to act without approval, to decide without hesitation, to live without permission. That's the price, that's the power. And Machiavelli paid it gladly, because while others chased comfort, he pursued clarity. While others drowned in emotion, he surfed its waves. He discovered that to lead others, you must first rise above yourself. To do that, you must silence the trembling part of your mind that begs for peace, for love, for validation. You must look at your own heart, full of noise, full of need, and learn to command it like a general commands an army. That's how Machiavelli turned exile into immortality. He built a fortress not of stone, but of mind, and no emotion could breach it. There's a moment every powerful mind eventually reaches, when they realize emotion is the last frontier of control. You can conquer nations, manipulate rivals, master rhetoric, but if one person's words can still make you tremble, you're not free. Machiavelli reached that moment the day he stopped fighting the chaos of the world and started studying it. He saw that life doesn't owe coherence. It's a shifting balance of fear and ambition, mercy and manipulation, truth and illusion. And the few who rise above it are those who stop asking, "Why is the world like this?" and start asking, "How can I move within it?" That was his genius. He didn't moralize reality, he navigated it. Because here's what he learned. Emotion is leverage, and whoever owns their emotions owns the leverage. Think about how power really moves today. Not through logic, not through reason. Through feeling. Politicians rise by stirring anger. Corporations thrive by selling desire. Movements explode through outrage. The masses are ruled not by thought, but by the pulse of emotion that spreads faster than truth. And the ones who command that pulse, the calm manipulators behind the noise, they're the true inheritors of Machiavelli. He understood long before social media, long before propaganda, that emotion could be manufactured. And the most dangerous person is not the one who feels deeply, but the one who can create feeling in others while remaining untouched by it themselves. That's the apex of persuasion. The invisible hand behind history. To reach that level, you must become fluent in human weakness, the craving for validation, the fear of exclusion, the need for certainty. Machiavelli never condemned these traits. He used them. When he advised rulers to appear merciful, it wasn't because he valued mercy, it was because he understood perception is power. People don't need reality, they need narrative. The prince who controls the story controls the crowd. That's why he wrote, "Men in general judge more by their eyes than by their hands." In modern terms, people don't care what's true. They care what feels true. And that's the secret every manipulator, every politician, every influencer understands intuitively. If you can trigger emotion, you can rewrite perception. But here's where Machiavelli stands apart. He didn't just manipulate others. He learned to deprogram himself. He became immune to flattery because he recognized it as strategy, immune to offense because he saw it as bait, immune to fear because he understood it as timing, a tool others used when they couldn't use reason. He rewired his emotional responses until nothing controlled him unconsciously. And this is what people get wrong about feeling nothing. It's not emptiness, it's immunity. It's the state where you still have emotions, but they serve you, not enslave you. Machiavelli would say, feel everything, but obey nothing. That's the kind of power the modern world doesn't teach. Because emotional independence is dangerous, it makes you unmarketable. You stop buying illusions. You stop believing in moral performances. You start seeing systems and the people who benefit from them. That's what makes you threatening, but that's also what makes you free. Imagine this level of awareness in your own life, walking into negotiations, relationships, conflicts, and seeing not just what people say, but why they say it. Seeing the pattern behind the persona. You'd stop reacting. You'd start directing. Every insult becomes data. Every flattery a signal. Every silence an opportunity. That's the transformation Machiavelli underwent from a man of passion to a man of pattern. And once you see patterns, emotion loses its mystery. He noticed how people respond to scarcity. Give them something rare, they'll worship it. He saw how guilt enslaves the virtuous, make them feel responsible, they'll obey without question. He studied how fear of exclusion drives conformity, isolate a person, and you can mold their beliefs entirely. These weren't theories, they were tactics he observed in rulers, merchants, even priests. Religion, politics, commerce, all ruled by emotion dressed as principle. That's why he could never again believe in ideals without seeing the machinery behind them. But that clarity didn't make him bitter, it made him precise. He learned to move like water, adapting to form, flowing around obstacles, never forcing, never begging. His emotional detachment wasn't about apathy. It was about maintaining the flexibility to survive any storm without losing self-command. And that's what modern leadership still lacks, emotional sovereignty. You can see it every day. Leaders who crumble under public outrage, negotiators who give in because they fear silence, creators who abandon their craft because approval wanes. They think emotion is authenticity. Machiavelli would say it's exposure. The less you reveal, the more you control. That doesn't mean deception for its own sake. It means protecting your emotional landscape from becoming public property. Because the moment people know what moves you, they own you. That's why Machiavelli believed unreadability was a higher virtue than honesty. In his world, as in ours, transparency is overrated. Not because truth isn't valuable, but because truth in the wrong hands becomes a weapon. So he learned to speak in layers, to communicate one thing and intend another, to flatter while warning, to concede while positioning. That's how the prince itself works, half instruction, half irony. A manual that can be read as both confession and trap. He wanted readers to question, is he teaching manipulation or exposing it? The answer, of course, is both. Because the ultimate manipulator is not the one who hides deceit, but the one who teaches others to reveal their own. He trained his readers, and by extension, his enemies, to think like him, and in doing so made them predictable. That's Machiavellian genius, to make your very exposure a form of control. Even centuries later, you see this pattern in masters of influence, the strategist who leaks just enough to appear honest, the leader who uses outrage to control attention, the artist who pretends vulnerability to deepen loyalty. They aren't lying, they're shaping perception. And if you look closely, you'll see that they all share one thing in common: calm. They move through storms without reacting, because they know whoever reacts first loses. Reaction is surrender. You can't play chess if every move is emotional impulse. You can't command loyalty if your mood decides your policy. You can't lead armies, companies, or even your own mind if you're ruled by feeling. Machiavelli's detachment was his armor, his calm his sword. And the moment you understand that calmness isn't passivity but domination, you begin to touch real power. The power of being the one who decides when to care, when to withdraw, when to act. That's the essence of feeling nothing. It's not numbness, it's precision. Because emotions, when timed right, can become nuclear. A single tear at the perfect moment, a measured outburst after prolonged restraint, these can shift alliances and alter history. but only if they're deliberate. That's what separates the manipulator from the manipulated. The manipulator chooses when to feel. The manipulated feels constant. Machiavelli chose, and that choice, that ruthless clarity, is what made him eternal. Now here's the hardest truth. If you want to live by his philosophy, you must be willing to let parts of yourself die. The naive part that expects fairness. The sentimental part that believes sincerity guarantees loyalty. The moral part that mistakes compliance for virtue. You must carve out your own mind from the noise of culture and rule it like a prince rules a city under siege. Because make no mistake, your mind is under siege. Every notification, every opinion, every demand for emotional reaction is an attack on your sovereignty. And every time you react without reflection, you lose territory. That's why Machiavellian detachment is more relevant now than ever. It's not about politics anymore. It's about mental survival. The digital world runs on emotion, outrage, envy, desire. The calmer you are, the less profitable you become. That's why calmness feels like rebellion now. And it is, because calmness means clarity, and clarity means control. You stop being a consumer of emotion and start being its engineer. That's what Machiavelli did. He engineered his own inner world so that nothing external could dictate his direction. He trained himself to feel nothing, not because he hated emotion, but because he refused to be enslaved by it. And that's the ultimate freedom. To wake up in a world built on manipulation and not be moved by it. To look at love without illusion, at fear without paralysis, at ambition without desperation. To live as an observer among participants, as a chess master among pawns. That's how Machiavelli won everything, not through power he took, but through power he no longer needed. He understood that the greatest victory is not over others, but over the self. Because when you conquer your own mind, when you can command your emotions instead of obeying them, no exile, no betrayal, no loss can defeat you. You become untouchable, not because the world can't hurt you, but because it can't control you. That's the final transformation. The moment when pain becomes signal, chaos becomes order, and emotion becomes instrument. That's how Machiavelli trained himself to feel nothing, and in doing so, won everything. Because to rule others, you must first rule yourself. And to rule yourself, you must learn the quietest, hardest lesson of all, that detachment is not coldness. It's power disguised as peace. But the truth is, detachment alone isn't enough. At some point, you have to turn that silence into strategy. The absence of emotion creates space, but what you fill that space with determines who you become. Machiavelli filled it with observation. He turned every conversation, every gesture, every hesitation into data. While others looked for sincerity, he looked for tells, the twitch in a diplomat's face when he lied, the subtle impatience of a noble who feared losing advantage. He didn't hear words, he heard motives disguised as sentences. That's how he built his second life, not in power, but in perception. And that's where people misunderstand him most. They think he glorified deceit. What he really glorified was awareness. Deceit to him was just a symptom of human nature. If you know the disease, you don't curse it, you learn to treat it. He realized that most people move through life blindfolded by their own morality. They believe everyone values honesty because they themselves do. They expect fairness because they practice it. They assume kindness will be reciprocated. But the world doesn't work on reflection. It works on exploitation. So Machiavelli decided to become the mirror, not the reflection. And that's the psychological leap few ever make. The leap from participant to observer, from reactor to strategist. He studied power the way a surgeon studies anatomy. He dissected it until every artery of manipulation and influence was mapped in his mind. He saw how flattery bypasses reason, how scarcity inflates value, how fear makes obedience feel like safety. He could look at a man and see not a personality, but a formula: pride plus insecurity equals loyalty. Ambition plus fear equals betrayal. That's how he predicted behavior. That's how he stayed alive. When you can read people like equations, you stop taking things personally. Their betrayals stop feeling like wounds. They become predictable outcomes of their design. That's the freedom Machiavelli reached: emotional detachment through psychological comprehension. It's what modern psychology now calls metacognition, awareness of awareness itself. But for him, it wasn't theory, it was survival. Every exile, every insult, every deception refined his perception until emotion became optional. He no longer needed the world to behave. He only needed to understand it. And once you understand, anger disappears. Because anger is the reaction of the surprised. He He was never surprised again. That's the level of clarity we rarely see today. People talk about emotional intelligence as empathy. Machiavelli would laugh. To him, emotional intelligence was accuracy, the precision to see what truly drives a person without being clouded by sympathy or disdain. He'd say, empathy without detachment is manipulation waiting to happen, you become the puppet. But empathy with detachment, that's control. You understand what others feel, but you remain untouched by it. You can comfort them, direct them, use their own fears and desires to guide them where you need them to go, and they'll thank you for it. That's not cruelty. That's leadership stripped of illusion. He saw that most rulers fail not because they're too harsh, but because they're too human. They seek affection instead of authority, friendship instead of function. He'd write, men must either be caressed or annihilated, meaning halfway measures destroy you. Be completely kind when it serves your purpose, or completely ruthless when it protects it. Anything in between invites rebellion. In psychological terms, inconsistent reinforcement breeds resistance. He was describing what modern behavioral science would later rediscover: predictability kills influence. To command attention, you must remain slightly uncertain, slightly distant. Machiavelli lived this truth long before psychology gave it language, and he practiced it not just politically, but personally. He learned the subtle art of the delayed response, how silence makes others speak more, how stillness makes others reveal themselves. He understood that the one who breaks silence first always loses ground. That's how he negotiated. That's how he survived interrogations. That's how he maintained control even while outnumbered. His calm became contagious and unnerving, because calmness in the face of chaos is the rarest form of dominance. It signals a man who knows something others don't. And in a world addicted to reaction, knowing when not to react is revolutionary. That's why even centuries later, every serious strategist, from Bismarck to Kissinger, carried his shadow. They all understood the same thing: appearances control outcomes. Let others think you're emotional while you stay surgical. Let them burn with passion while you move in calculation. Because once people believe you're guided by heart instead of mind, they underestimate you. And the underestimated always win. Machiavelli thrived on that principle. He played the fool when he needed to, laughed when cornered, agreed when overpowered, not out of weakness but out of choice. To him, surrender was sometimes the most strategic form of dominance, the kind that lets your opponent overextend. He once wrote that a prince should learn how not to be good, and to use that knowledge or not as necessity requires. What he meant was, morality is a tool, not a commandment. Use it when it strengthens you, discard it when it cages you. Because goodness without power is fragility, and power without restraint is chaos. The balance is mastery, the ability to choose, not to be chosen by your impulses. That's what emotional neutrality gives you: choice. You decide when to forgive, when to strike, when to wait. You're no longer a slave to the moment, you become its author. In that sense, Machiavelli wasn't just teaching politics, he was teaching self-governance. He knew that nations and minds follow the same laws. Both collapse from internal disorder before they fall to external enemies. A prince must govern his city the way a thinker governs his mind, by suppressing rebellion within. That rebellion is emotion unruled. Fear becomes panic, love becomes obsession, pride becomes blindness, and the city of the mind burns. Machiavelli refused to let that happen. He built an inner government, reason as king, emotion as counsel, not command. And that's why he could lose everything and still remain whole. His power no longer depended on title, wealth, or approval. It lived entirely in his ability to stay composed. That's what makes him immortal, the fact that his philosophy can't be exiled. Because when your strength lives inside your discipline, no external force can take it. That's the Machiavellian paradox. The man who felt nothing gained everything that truly lasts. We live in a time that rewards performance over perception, expression over observation, reaction over restraint. Every second screams for your attention. Every platform demands your outrage. Every algorithm measures how easily you can be provoked. And yet in that noise, the Machiavellian mind remains silent, not absent, but listening. While others argue, it calculates. While others confess, it collects. While others reveal, it refines. Because calmness is now rebellion and focus is now power. The modern prince is not born in palaces. He's born in the chaos of distraction and wins by remaining undisturbed. That's how Machiavelli's ghost survives in every person who resists emotional manipulation, who who pauses before responding, who values composure over reaction. In the man who doesn't need to prove his strength, only demonstrate it through silence. In the woman who refuses to be guilted into compliance, who stays unreadable, untouchable, serene. They are his descendants, invisible rulers of their own inner kingdom, because that's where true sovereignty begins, not in control over others, but in mastery over self. You don't need a throne to rule. You need clarity. You don't need armies to win. You need composure. You don't need to feel nothing forever. You just need to feel nothing until the right moment. Because when emotion becomes choice instead of compulsion, when you can summon it with precision, it becomes the sharpest weapon of all. That's the lesson Machiavelli carved into history. Power is not given to the strongest or the kindest, but to the most self-contained. The world bows not to passion, to presence. And presence, true, unshakable presence, can only exist in the absence of chaos within. So train yourself as he did, to observe when others react, to wait when others rush, to speak only when silence has built its gravity. Let people think you feel nothing, while in truth you feel everything, but at your command. That's the invisible crown, the one no exile, no betrayal, no century can strip away. It's the power of a man who turned pain into philosophy, humiliation into strategy, and emotion into empire. It's the legacy of Niccolo Machiavelli, the man who learned that to rule others, you must first rule yourself. And when you finally do, when no insult can shake you, no praise can seduce you, no fear can drive you, you'll understand what he meant all along. That the highest form of strength is not domination, it's detachment, because only those who can stand apart from the storm can command it. Only those who feel nothing unnecessarily can feel everything deliberately, and only those who master emotion can truly master power.